Masechet Sukkah, Daf Yud Bet, and what a daf it is. We have 4 subjects. First of all, why does the sekhakh need to be something that grows from the ground from plants? We're going to see 4 different answers to this, each one fascinating. One from Resh Lakish, 2 different versions of something that Yohanan says, and the last one from Rav Hisda. Then we're going to see talk about bundles in the next Mishnah. If you have straw that's bundled together, it is not usable as sekhakh. We'll see interesting reasons why, 2 possible reasons. And then we'll talk about using a shaft of an arrow for sekhakh. And finally, stages of flax processing, very relevant. Well, maybe not, but the first one absolutely is very relevant. So answer number 1 is going to be from Gan Eden, then comparing it to Korban Hagigah. The third one is comparing it to the Harvest Festival, and then from a very, very important pisukim from Nehemiah. So we jump right in. Zeh kilal kol davar shemekabel tum'ah and gidulo min haaretz. In order for sekhakh to be kosher, it cannot be a vessel, and it has to grow from the ground. What is the source? Amar Resh Lakish, Amar Chera, ve'ed ya'aleh min ha'ares. Ma ed davar she'eno mekabel tum'ah v'gidulo min ha'ares, af sukkah davar she'en mekabel tum'ah v'gidulo min ha'ares. So Resh Lakish explains, it's from the pasuk in Bereshit Perek Bet, describing Gan Eden, that there was a mist coming up from the ground, and the mist comes up from the ground. It's describing evaporation, and it becomes a cloud, and then it rains onto the ground. It's actually very interesting that describing the water cycle, the full understanding of the water cycle was not discovered until relatively recently. In ancient Near East, usually they thought rain comes from little windows in the sky that release the rain. So that's an interesting side point. But anyway, we're learning from here that since you see that clouds come up from the ground, and so therefore the sekhakh has to be made of something that comes up from the ground. Okay, so if your head is trying to wrap your mind around this, what's the connection between exactly Gan Eden, mist that is rising up in Gan Eden, and the Sukkah? It's good that you're wondering this, because it really is not at all clear what's the connection between the Gan Eden and the Sukkah. You can see already that we're getting into something more of like Agadah, kind of like what we saw last time a while ago about the 10 Tefachim. And we're going to see in a second that this is going to be related to Ananei HaKavod. So I think you have to make the connection as follows, right? The Sukkah, according to one opinion, actually let's read it. Hanicha leman damar ananei kavod hayu, ela leman damar sukkot mamash asu lehem, ma'ika lememar. If you're using this imagery, Resh Lakish, that the sekhakh is similar to clouds, and clouds rise up from the water that's on the earth, and that's why it has to come from the earth. That only makes sense according to the opinion that the Sukkah is reminiscent of the clouds of glory in the desert. But according to the other opinion that said Bnei Israel in the desert actually sat in physical huts made out of wood, then what would you say? Because if it's not referring to the clouds of glory, then what would you say? The Tanya, and now we bring the source, it's a Braita, Ki basukot hoshavti et Bnei Israel. Pasuk in Vayikra and Pashat Emor says, Hashem had us sitting in Sukkot. What does that mean? So Rabbi Eliezer says there were clouds of glory. I mean, after all, it says that God had us sit in them, and we know another place in Torah talks about the clouds of glory. So these Sukkot are actually supernatural supernatural protection that of the clouds. Rabbi Akiva Omer Sukkot mamash asu lahem. The second opinion says, no, there were actually physical huts made out of wood and straw. So So it makes sense according to the first opinion that compares the Sukkah to clouds. Then it would make sense that since clouds rise up from the earth, so too the sekhakh should be made out of something that comes from the earth. But according to the other opinion that says they were actually just physical huts made out of any material, then what would be the source? Okay, really fascinating here. This baraita that it quotes is the source comes from the Sifra, the Tanaitic Midrash on Vayikra. If you look in the Sifra, you'll see that the names are switched. It's Rabbi Akiva that says that the Sukkot were clouds of glory. And that really makes sense according to Rabbi Akiva's general personality, being more of a mystical side and creative, that Rabbi Akiva would be the one to say that they were clouds of glory. So I did check every manuscript of the Talmud Bavli, has just like we had, but I think nevertheless the Tannaitic source from the Sifra is more likely authoritative here. And so you might want to switch around the opinions. Okay, either way, whoever said each one, we have a partial answer if they in fact were clouds. So this is really super beautiful, interesting Agadah, and it does remind us of when we talked about the shortest sukkah being 10 tefachim, and we said that because that's the meeting place between the human realm and the divine realm, right? V'noadati lechasham, on top of the Aron, and the last pasuk that we quoted in that sugya was from Iyov, Parshez alav anano, that Hashem spread his cloud of glory upon Moshe at the time of Matan Torah. So there was a cloud, and the cloud is a representation of God's presence. And so clouds in this case being a perfect symbol of that connection. Clouds on the one hand rise from the earth, but they go into heaven. And God is always described as riding on the clouds in various places in biblical poetry. So thinking about the clouds of glory in the desert and the Sukkah as being reminiscent of that. So this is really a beautiful way of thinking about the sekhakh that has to be made out of something else that grows from the ground. Okay, so that's really cool, but more in the sense of an agadah. So now we're going to get to the second source, which is back to the realm of halacha. Ki ata Rav Dimi, Amar Rabbi Yohanan, Amar Qira, Hag Sukkot HaSedecha. מקיש סוכה לחגיגה. מה חגיגה? הדבר שאינו מקבל טומאה וגידולו מן הארץ. אף סוכה הדבר שאינו מקבל טומאה וגידולו מן הארץ. Well, we're going to compare the sukkah to a korban hagigah. We already made this comparison one time before, that the hagigah has to be yours, and so too the sukkah has to be yours. Forgot the right. We made a connection here. And so, no, it has to be La Hashem. That's what we said before, right? It has to be, you have to do it lishma, and you can't take it. So too the sukkah. So there's a connection between the sukkah, thinking of it as a korban that you make like hekdesh. That was it. Just like Hagigah, you can't use the Hagigah for yourself. You can't use the wood, right? Any of the wood of the sukkah, you cannot use it all 7 days because it's like hekdesh. Okay, so that was the connection we made before, and now we're extending it and saying just like a Hagigah comes from an animal. An animal is not mekabel tumah. While if an animal is alive, it cannot receive tumah. Unlike human beings can receive tumah. Animals that are dead can receive tumah. Food can, but a live animal does not receive tumah. And so too, something that is connected to the ground also does not receive tumah. And when it's cut, also, if it's not a vessel, it does not receive tumah. So that's that connection. And gidulo min haaretz. This is a bit strange. Animals grow from the ground. Well, kosher animals, herbivorous animals, do eat from the ground. So they're called that they grow from the grass that they eat in the ground. So in some sense, yes, they do grow in the ground. And this is the second connection. So again, it's a little bit of a stretch to describe animals as growing from the ground. And it's going to be more of a stretch with the next question that we have on this. Hold on, a korban chagigah you make out of an animal. Are you going to make sekhakh out of an animal? Are you going to put a cow on top of your sekhakh, right? And use that? That would be preposterous for anyone to think that you can use such a thing. Yes, you can use a live cow as a wall, but not as part of your roof. Okay, so that really can't be. So that was Rabbi Yohanan number one. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he offered another answer, also in the name of Rabbi Yohanan. Amar kera beospecha migornecha Umi yikbecha bifsolat goren veyekev hakatuv medaber. So pasuk says that you're going to celebrate Sukkot for 7 days when you gather from the threshing floor and from your wine press. And this is absolutely true. The Sukkot is also an agricultural holiday besides the historical element. It's at the time of the harvest when we have everything out in the field and it's dried, and now we take the grain to the threshing floor and take the grain remove the grains from the chaff, and we take the vines to the wine press, and we make our wine. So therefore, since it's talking about during harvest time, what do you have a lot of around? Well, you have a lot of the waste product. When after you thresh, you have the chaff, you have the rest of the shaft of grain, and so that you can use not the seed itself, everything else, and then the vine, the branches from the vines after you've plucked off all the grapes. So since all that's around, and it talks about that in the same pasuk that it says you celebrate Sukkot, it makes perfect sense to use that. And that's why right now I am sitting in the middle of a field of grain, as you can see. Okay, so that's the third answer. A couple of questions on the Yohanan's answer. It's interesting that we ask a couple of questions on the answer that actually seems to be the most peshat, right? We didn't ask anything about, we did. We asked one question about the animal. Hold on. How do you know that you're talking about the leftover, the waste products? Maybe it's talking about you're going to actually use the grain itself, right? And the wine itself, wine press itself, with the product that you made. Well, one of the pair is yekev, which is wine, and you can't make sekhakh out of wine because it's liquid, and so that's not going to work. Maybe if you make it into a cloud form or something, right? No, so you can't do that. And since you can't use the wine that is the product of the grapes, so too you would not use the grain, even though technically I guess you could put grains in a basket and use them as sekhakh. So no, therefore it's not talking about the product that you make, but rather the leftovers from the process. Next question, also on that answer. Remember him? He's the one that gave us the 4 cases of the sukkah on top of a sukkah. He likes dealing with lots of theoretical cases. So here he says, maybe it's talking about this congealed wine that comes from up in the north. They used to take wine and make it into some kind of jello. And that is a solid. So theoretically, it seems a bit strange. You could take this jello and wine jello and use it as sekhakh. It's similar to fig cakes, or these kind of fruit roll-ups. And so technically you could use that. And since you could use that, maybe you could use the grain. And maybe the pasuk is saying, yes, use the product of the wine press and of the threshing floor, not the leftover branches. So in response to the Yirmiyah's question, Amar Rabbi Zera, ha-mileta hava biyadan, v'ata Rabbi Yirmiyah ushta ben nagra. Rabbi Zera is upset at Rabbi Yirmiyah because he says, we had a good answer. Rabbi Yohanan, finally, we had, after all this agadah, we had a good answer that we're talking about the harvest, that we use all the branches. And look, Rabbi Yirmiyah came and ruined it. He took an axe and smashed our very fine answer. So he was upset. Rabbi Zera was upset that Rabbi Yirmiyah always has to bring in some crazy theoretical case and ruins our good arguments. But luckily, Rav Hashe comes and answer it, and he says, Amad, Mi gorenecha velo goren asmo. Mi yikbecha velo yekeb asmo. Since it says the word mem, meaning not the goren itself, not the grain, but something that is from the goren. It doesn't say make sekhakh with yekev, but rather something that comes from the wine press. So therefore, it's and not the grapes themselves, but rather the waste products, which are the branches and the stalks of the process of making the wine and the grain. Okay, good. So that is the third answer. And let's just go back to our chart, right? So how do we know that sekhakh has to be from plants and can't be, has to be something that is not mekabel tuma? So we saw the beautiful comparison to Gan Eden, and then also the interesting one to Hagigah, sense of holiness also, if you can comparing it to a Hagigah. But both of those are a bit of a stretch. So Rabbi Yohanan is Harvest Festival, and Rav Hisda is going to bring very strong textual proof, that maybe the clearest textual proof from Nehemiah. Although it is from Nehemiah, and so we don't usually learn halachot from Navi and Ketuvim in this case, but in this case they are describing an actual celebration of Sukkot. So let's see what they did. Rav Hisda mar mehachasu ahad v'habiu ale zayit v'ale shemen v'ale es hadas v'ale tamarim v'ale es avot. Question, Hainu hadas, Hainu es avot. It seems to list two of the same items. Amar Rav Hisda, hadas shote l'sukkah, ve'es avot l'sukkah. These two different types of myrtles, one of them is for sukkah and one of them is for lulav. Let me explain what he's talking about by showing you the context of the Pesukim. In Vayikra, which he doesn't quote here, but this is the source from Vayikra, and it says that after the word ach, says on the first day you should take these four items: pri ayis hadar, that's what we say is an etrog; kapot tamarim, tamar, that's the lulav; anaf esabot, that's what we call hadas; arbe nachal, that's the aravot. So you take these four things. Now, what do you do with them? Pasuk says you should be happy with them before God. So before God sounds like you come to the Bet HaMikdash, that's where God resides, and be happy with them, means shake them and take them around. That's how we interpret it. And then two Pesukim later it says, also you should sit in Sukkot. Everybody should sit in a Sukkah, so that you will know that I, Hashem, put you in Sukkot when I took you out of Egypt, and so on. So it seems like this is two different mitzvot. One is take these four things and then make Sukkot. However, you can read this as all one. Take these four different items of produce and then go and use them to make Sukkot. And that interpretation is implied in the book of Nehemiah. In Nehemiah, we have a story about Ezra, who comes from Bavel to Eretz Israel, and he teaches everyone the Torah. And they teaches them on Rosh Hashanah, and they did not know it before. And they realize, oh, they didn't even know today was Rosh Hashanah. And then they come back the next day, and they learn more, and they learn about Sukkot. And it says they never celebrated Sukkot since the time of Yehoshua bin Nun. So as they read it, they apply it. And so Ezra tells them, listen, you have to go out and make an announcement everywhere in the cities and in Jerusalem to go out to the mountains and go bring the following items. And it lists 5 items: ale zait v'ale shemen, which is olive branches. It really is 2 different names for olive branches, olives or for olive oil. And then ale hadas. Okay, so if I could just, I compared them with colors. So the olive branches, is the closest thing to Peri Eitz Adad, although we say that that's talking about etrog, but there's no etrog down here. So these are the most equivalent. Hadas is what we call etz avot. Good. And also bring ale tamarim, that's the 4th thing on the list. That's like a kapot tamarim, that's the lulav. And then the last thing, ale es avot, avot is etz avot, is another word for hadas. So you see something a bit strange, which is that we have 3 of the items on the list of the Torah. We're missing arvei nachal, but instead we have 2 mentions of zayit and shemen, and we have 2 names for hadas and avot. So that's the point that the Gemara is picking up on. How come over here you just have one thing, avot, and here you have hadas and avot? The next pasuk in Nehemiah says the people went out and they did just that. So they go out and get all these branches and they make sukkahs. So it looks from here like they took the branches and they used them to make their sukkot. So that's really interesting. Does that mean that they didn't march around with them and shake them? Hold on to that thought. But let me go back to the Talmud so we can explain what it means. So here we quote the pasuk, and then we wonder, hadas and esavot are referring to the same thing. Why does the pasuk twice talk about myrtles? So Rav Hisda explains that hadas is referring to wild myrtles, and that would not be good for the 4 species, right? They're not easy to hold. They're all grow. They grow in a wild way. So, but those are good for making a sukkah. So they would use them for a sukkah. The other one called etzavot, that's the one that they used for lulav. For the lulav. Good. And so from here he proves that the people in the time of Nehemiah, they used things that grew from the ground, some of them overlapping with the four species, and used them to make the sukkah. So this is a great way to learn it, because not only do you learn that they used things that grow from the ground, it also shows that there's a deep connection between the mitzvah of sukkah and the mitzvah of lulav. Until today, there are some people that like to have the custom that they want to shake lulav in the sukkah so that they can do both together. Okay, so that is the end of that discussion. That's the last thing. I do just want to, as an addendum, show you that what the implication that we were avoiding was said by some groups, specifically the Sadducees. Ibn Ezra quotes them and says they read the book of, he calls it the book of Ezra. We call it the book of Nehemiah. Originally, they were all one book. It was all one book, Ezra, Nehemiah, and called the book of Ezra. Anyway, he quotes it in saying that the Sadducees say you take the different four species and use them to make Sukkot. But he says these people are blind. Can't you see that in the book of Ezra it says Arvei Nachal? It doesn't say Piri Etz Kilal. So you see, and there's five other things. So the lists don't actually match up with each other. And so therefore you have no argument against the oral tradition, our tradition, that we, besides taking a sukkah, we also take lulav and shake them separately. Okay, and Ibn Ezra talks about how he traveled Europe, and so he knew more about the species. As one part of the reason they got that wrong because they didn't understand the plants that they were talking about. Okay, a proof for the oral tradition, by the way, can be found in some Second Temple sources, like the book of Jubilees and the book of Maccabees. It said, because here it says that Abraham already he celebrated Sukkot, obviously, and he took all these branches and fruit of goodly trees, and every day going around the altar with branches 7 times in the morning, he praised and gave thanks. He said Hallel. Okay, so leave aside the question of did the Avot do all the mitzvot and what kind of altar did he have? Right. The point is that when this author is thinking of how to celebrate, he is not taking the 4 minim and making a sukkah with them, but actually marching around with them. And Yehuda Maccabi also, when they come and purify the Bet HaMikdash in the time of Chanukah, they took all the beautiful branches and they said hymns, and they marched around with them. Right, they used them, they held them while they were saying Hallel. So this is beautiful. That's exactly what we do. So you see that this is the oral tradition goes back a long time from the time of the Bet HaMikdash and earlier. Okay, so that's really fascinating. One last point is that we're going to see in Sukkah later on Daf Lamed Vav, that there is an opinion. The Tanya Basukot Teshvus Sukkah Shel Kol Davar B'Meir says you can make a sukkah out of anything. The Yehuda says en sukkah noheget ela b'arba minim shebalulav. There is a Tanaitic opinion of the Yehuda that says you have to use 4 minim in order to make a sukkah. So see, according to that, you use the 4 minim for 2 things, right? One is to hold them together and shake them and march around while saying Hallel, and you also use them up for a sukkah. And you see he's getting that from the Pisukim in Nehemiah. In any case, I think that gives a lot of good background to what we just read in the name of Rav Hisda, that we are using the 4 minim and the connection with Nehemiah to learn that the sekhakh has to be made out of things that grow from the ground. Okay, next topic is bundles. Chabile kash v'chabile asim v'chabile zeradin en mesakechin bahen v'chulan shetiran l'kesherot v'chulan kesherot lidfanot. So if you have a bundle of straw or wood or twigs, right? So by themselves, they're okay, but when you bundle them together, you cannot use them as sekhakh. Remember these words, en mesakechin bahen. Doesn't say pisula, just says you can't use them. How do you fix it? Well, you just undo the tie. Let them out, spread them out, and that is good. And also, all of these are good for walls. You can leave them as bundles and you can use them as walls. This v'chulan might even be going on the previous Mishnayot. All the things we mentioned that is not good for sekhakh, you can use them all for walls. So we're going to have to explain, why can't you use a bundle of twigs for sekhakh? It grows from the ground. It's not connected from the ground. It's not mekabel tumah because it's not a vessel. So what is the problem? So we're going to see that there is something called the gezerah of otsar. In order for sekhakh to be kosher, it has to be placed on top of the roof for protection of shade. It has to be used for shade. If I put something on the roof to dry out in the sun, then it's not good sekhakh. If I put something on the roof in order to store it as storage place, because I don't want to take up floor space, I put it on the roof as storage, that's not good sekhakh. And so the problem here, as the Talmud is going to explain, is that if I come and take a bundle, even if I personally have in mind, I'm putting this up there for shade, but the next guy might not know that, and he might put it up to dry it out, and then he'll leave it there, and he'll say, "Oh, you know what? I'll use it for a sukkah," and that's the problem. So it's a gezerah that if you use something that's a bundle, then you will end up using something that you didn't put up as shade, but rather to dry out or as storage. Okay, so let's see how the Gemara explains it. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Shema'it mined Rabbi Yohanan tartes. I heard two things from Rabbi Yohanan. So remember, Rabbi Yohanan is like second generation. That would be making Rabbi Yaakov a third generation. He hears it from him, and he says, "Hada ha ve'idach hachotet begadish lasot lo sukkah ena sukkah." So Rabbi Yohanan told me one halacha about this Mishnah, and he told me a halacha also about an upcoming Mishnah that says if you have a hay pile, a stack of hay, and you dig under it a hole, like a tunnel under it, and then you make a sukkah out of that. The walls, doesn't matter what they're made out of, and on top you have hay, which is kosher sekhakh. And remember, before we said this is a problem of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. So I have that Mishnah. And Rabbi Yochanan told me something about both of these Mishnayot. Chada mishum gezerat osar, v'chada mishum ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui, v'la yada'ana heminayu mishum osar, v'heminayu mishum ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. And he told me that the reason for one of them is because of gezerat osar, that someone might put something up there as storage and not for shade and end up using it. That would be gezerah. That would be a problem midrabanan. And the other halacha is that you have to make it actively and not from a pre-existing structure, and that's a pasuk. So this would be deoraita, a problem deoraita. The problem is, Rabbi Yaakov says, I don't remember which reason applies to which halacha. Theoretically, you can apply them both to both halachot, because if I put something up there for storage and not for shade, and then I say, you know what? I'm going to use it for a sukkah, so then I didn't do something active in order to make it. It's something that was there already for another reason. But the hay is also the same problem. That it's maybe I put it there for storage. Hay is a storage pile, and both of them are ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. They're pre-existing structures I decided to use after for sekhakh. So I don't remember which one he applied to which. Okay, that was the question. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, he's our favorite Amorah. Actually, this time he's not throwing a wrench in the theoretical case, but rather he's going to give us a very good answer. Necheze anan. We can analyze this ourselves. The Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yohanan. Rabbi Chia said, and also in the name of Rabbi Yohanan. So we have another tradition. How come in the Mishnah says bundles of twigs you cannot use as sekhakh? פעמים שאדם בא מן השדה בערב, וחבילתו על כתפו, ומעלה ומניחה על גבי סוכתו כדי לייבשה, ונמלח עליה לסיכוך. והתורה אמרה, תעשה ולא מן העשוי. So here I'm going to show you how. Sometimes people will come in from the field in the evening, and they're carrying their bundles on their shoulders, and they put it up on top of on the roof in order to dry out. And then they leave it there to dry out. And then later on, when Sukkot comes around, they decide, you know what, I'll use it as sekhakh. But that's no good, because the Torah says you have to make it specifically for shade and not min ha'asui. Now, in this case, the person we're talking about a general case where a person may do this. So you see, the problem actually here is a gezerah that may lead to ta'aseh velo min ha'asui. So if someone would take a bundle of branches and put it on for shade, really that would be okay. That's not a problem of ta'aseh velo ha'asui. He's making it with bundles and he has proper intention of shade. The problem is that someone during the year beforehand will put it up there, just not thinking I'm tired from a full day of work, put it up there to dry, and then later on will change his mind. So that's a gezerah that will come to ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. We're going to call that gezerat osad, right? So that, because then that means if you will permit it lichatechila, then it will come to a case where someone will put something up to dry or to store and will not move it around again, and that would be the problem. So midaha mishum gezerat osad, ha mishum ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. Since the case of a bundle is because of a gezerah, that's the Rabbanan one, therefore that leaves the other case of the haystack. That is ta'aseh velo min ha'asui, that the haystack that you dig out is a pre-existing structure. So there you go, he solved it. Now we're wondering, Rabbi Yaakov, how come he didn't know that? Rabbi Yaakov, he never heard it, even though they're both students of Rabbi Yohanan. He just never heard that. He forgot it. He got confused. Okay, good. Amar Rav Asher, atu chabile kash v'chabile esim mishum gezrat osad ika mishum taaseh v'lo min ha'asui leka. Hold on. I know you matched up 1-to-1, but putting bundles of straw, is it only because of gerat osad and not also a problem of taaseh min ha'asui? And also, v'achotet begadish mishum taaseh min ha'asui ika mishum gerat osad leka. And the one who digs it out, how come you don't say it's both problems? That's taaseh min ha'asui. And in the future, someone might come and say, oh, look, remember that thing I used for storage and that was okay? So now I'm going to use another thing for storage. Why don't we add another prohibition and say both are asur midoraita and midrabanan? In a case where you do it actively, or even in a case where you have the proper intention, because in another case you might not have the proper intention. So that's Rav Asher's question. Why are you dividing it only one reason and one reason? And Rabbi Yohanan answers, he would answer for us, here in our Mishnah, it doesn't say pisula, it just says you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't use it for sekhakh. Why shouldn't you do it lechatechila? Because of gezerah. If you put it up there, if you put a bundle up there, even if you have the proper intention, the next guy is not going to remember. He's going to put it up to dry, and it won't be good. So deoraita shapir dameh. But midoraita, if you remove the gezerah, b'di'avad, if you did it, midoraita, it's okay. And so that's why it says en mesakichin bahen. Hatam dekatani ena sukkah. But regarding the haystack, that Mishnah says it's not a sukkah, zero. It doesn't have the definition at all. Afilu di'avad. Even if you did it already and you sat in it already, no good. Midoraita name ena sukkah, even midoraita, because that was a violation of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. Okay, so that was very interesting, and now the rest of it will be pretty quick. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, sekhakh b'chaisin. So now we're talking about the shafts of an arrows before you connect them, and we have a picture for this. There are two types of arrows and shafts. One is a bet yad. One is called zachar, male, or convex, and that's where the hole is in the arrowhead and it goes on top. This is called a male arrow shaft, and this one is called a female because here this has the hole and it's the arrowhead that goes into it. So this is going to be called the nekeva. So now we have these two types. Forget about the arrowhead. We're talking about the stick itself. If we take a bunch of these and use them as sekhakh, would that be okay? So the general principle is something that's made out of wood. If it has a place where that can hold water, then that could be mekabel tumah. So this part of it can be mekabel tumah. The one that looks like this is just a stick and it cannot hold anything. It has no interior. No bet kibul, and therefore this thing cannot be mekabel tumah. So that's the two categories that we're going to see. And back to the Talmud. So he says, sekhakh b'chisim zecharim keshera. If you use the convex The zecharim, that's okay, because those are just sticks and they're not vessels, they're not mekabel tuma. B'nikevot pesula. But if you use the concave arrows, those can, you can put water in them. They can hold something. They have an inside, and therefore they are mikabel tuma as a vessel, so you cannot use them. Okay, that's Rav's statement. Now we ask a question. Zecharim keshera peshita. Obviously, the male ones would be kasher because it's just a plain old stick. There's nothing. It's definitely not a vessel. Why do you even have to tell me that? Well, we might have thought maybe we'll make a gezerah. People are going to say these arrow shafts, they all look the same. And if they think that one is kosher, they're going to think the other one's kosher also. And they're not going to distinguish between the shape of the zecharim and the shapes of the nekevot. And they're going to use them all together. So this might lead to mixed dancing. That would not be good. Amar mor b'nekeva pesula peshita. Now we say the nekeva, the one that does have a hole in it, is pesula, is no good. That's also pashut. I mean, what is Rav teaching us? We know anything that is made out of wood and has an air space that can hold something is a vessel. So it's mekabel tumas, not good as sekhakh. Bet kibul asud malot lasheme kibul kamashman. You might have thought that this is not made as a permanent vessel. You're not going to use this as a cereal bowl or to drink juice out of. It's only made in the middle of the process until you take the arrowhead and attach it. So since it's only temporarily a hole and you're going to fill it and glue it in there, so therefore I might think it's not really a vessel. I'm not actually going to use it for any purpose. So this, therefore, Rav comes to teach us, yes, even though you plan on attaching the arrowhead, nevertheless, right now, it is a wooden vessel with a concave area, and that is therefore considered a vessel and cannot be used for sekhakh. Okay, and lastly, we get to the processing of flax. Amar Rabba bar Hana Amar Rabbi Yohanan. And then Rabbi Yohanan, he says, sekhakh be'anise fishtan pesula. So if you take combed flax, then it's no good. So that would be the last step in processing flax. Flax, you just take these stalks. If you use the stalks themselves, that's totally fine, unprocessed. But then they would first soak them for a long time, and that soaking is actually like a fermentation process, and it gets soft. After that, you take them out and beat them. Okay, so first soaking, then beating. By beating them, you separate the fibers, and then after beating it, you comb it. Okay, so if it's after the last stage of combing, that is considered already a finished product, a vessel, mekabel tum'ah. So that for sure is not good. If you use the stalks of flax unprocessed, then obviously that is totally fine for sekhakh. The question is, hushne fishtan, but in between, where they're called hushne, and the in-between process, Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm not sure if they're considered raw material or if they're considered processed material. So that was a statement in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Now the transmitter, Rabba bar Hana, adds something himself. I'm also not sure not only what the law is regarding hushne, but what stage in the processing does hushne even refer to? Is it that if you smash it, but you didn't yet comb it, right? So post-smashing, pre-combing, and that's hushne, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan didn't know about. But if you washed it and didn't smash it yet, then that's just raw material, even though you washed it already, and that would for sure be okay. Or maybe what Rabbi Yochanan meant to say is that if I just washed it, even if I didn't beat it yet, that's called hushne, and that's in between category, he's not sure. But if you did both of those things, then it would be already processed. So is it just after the washing or also after the beating? Is that what is called hushne? So that is the flax processing. And I'm assuming most of us are not beating our own flax, so the halacha l'maaseh there is not as important. But the first section about the reason why Gidulah min haaretz, we saw that beautiful Agadah that so nicely connects the imagery and symbolism of the sekhakh to the Hagigah, the holiness of it, and also to the clouds and to Gan Eden. And we should feel that sense of being in Gan Eden as we leave the protection of our homes and enjoy the protective covering of the divine providence, reminding us of the clouds of glory. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'Amen.